Mr. Morgan Housel is a partner at the Collaborative Fund and a former columnist at The Motley Fool and The Wall Street Journal.
Thank you so much for having me. I know it's been a long day for everyone, but it's an honor to get to do this and to get to speak in front of you. I just want to talk for a few minutes here. I know we don't have that much time, but I want to talk for a little bit about my book, The Psychology of Money. And I'll tell you the origins of this book, because the origins, I think, really summarize why I think the book, in my mind, was important and why I wanted to write it. I started as a financial writer in 2008. That's when I began my career writing about finance. And that was an interesting time to begin because the world, of course, was imploding with the great global financial crisis and the banking crisis all over the world. So I spent my first couple of years as a writer just trying to answer the question, why did that happen? What happened during the financial crisis? What explained the housing bubble that preceded it? What explained the banking failures that came after it? I just wanted to answer that question. And I realized that as the years went on, that you could not answer the question, why did the banking crisis happen? You could not answer that question if you were just looking through the lens of finance or economics. There was nothing in an economics textbook that would have explained why people did what they did during the financial crisis. There was nothing in a finance textbook that could have explained the behaviors that people made and the decisions that people made during the financial crisis. But if you were looking through the lens of sociology or psychology or political science or biology, all of those fields perfectly explained why people did what they did. And so that to me just opened up this idea that investing is not the study of finance. Investing is the study of how people make decisions with money and how people behave with money. And behavior is such a big and broad and encompassing field that to me, it was just this exciting idea that you could explain most of finance and most of how people deal with money if you were looking through the lens of fields that had nothing to do with money, these behavioral topics. And so most of the book is trying to explain how we deal with money, but it's telling stories about things that have nothing to do with money. And I think one of the biggest problems in financial education all over the world, in the United States, in India, everywhere, is that we tend to view finance and teach finance like it's math, like it's just about data and formulas, and that if you have the right data and the right formulas, you will get the right answer. And I just think there's so much evidence that it's not, that finance is not like math. It's a much softer, behavioral, psychological-driven topic. And I think this is what leads a lot of people astray. I'll tell you one analogy that I think is really fitting here. The most important decision that most people will ever make in their entire life is whether, when, and whom to marry. It's the most important decision you will ever make in your life. But that topic is not taught in schools. Never is there going to be a high school course or a university course called How to Pick a Spouse. It's never going to happen because you can't teach it. Everybody is different. They have different goals, different desires, different needs and wants. So you can't summarize that topic down to a formula. And I think finance is exactly the same. This is why financial education has been so hard to bring all over the world, is because so much of what matters in finance just cannot be taught. It's personality driven. It's based off of your own individual view of the world. So many different financial debates all over the world. Debates about how much money should you spend? How much money should you save? How should you invest your money? Most of the time that people are having a debate about that topic, they're not actually arguing with each other. They're not actually debating each other. It's people with different time horizons, different risk tolerances, different views of the world, just talking over one another. And that is why I think behavioral finance is so important. To step away from viewing money like it is just about the numbers and the datas and the charts and formulas, and viewing it as a much softer behavioral topic. What I hope was the biggest takeaway from the book, and maybe the one takeaway that I hope to leave with you this evening, is just kind of a plea to be more introspective about who you are with money, what your own individual goals are, what your own personality is, what your own risk tolerance is. That's what actually matters with money. Because if you are seeking a solution to your financial problems in a textbook, or even in my book, you're not gonna find it. You're gonna find the answer to your financial problems in the mirror. When you go out of your way to try to figure out what you and your family's goals and risk tolerances and time horizons and just what you want out of life, that's where you're gonna find it. The purpose of money is using it as a tool to give yourself a better life. So simple, so obvious, but it is so easy to ignore that that's the entire purpose of it. And for so many people, I think really the key to money is not trying to figure out what works in the spreadsheet, what works with the numbers. It's managing your money to sleep better at night, to make yourself happier, to just give yourself a better life. I think if you think about it through that lens, which is primarily a behavioral finance lens, so many people can learn to have a better relationship with money. I think we have some time now for some questions, but thank you again. I know this has been a long day for everyone and it's getting late for you, but I think we're gonna have a question and answer session now. So thank you again for letting me join during this, and I'm so glad I could be here, at least if we're just doing it online, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's personally a very big fanboy moment for me talking to you. I really, really love your writing. And we cannot thank you enough for joining us over here.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
You have no idea that, we have Diwali every year, and every year not every year, but Psychology of Money is the most gifted book for us. And anybody and everybody, if there's a good gift to give, it's the Psychology of Money. It's just amazing the way you have simplified the subject. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, let's get into the question and answers. You had once tweeted that, what have you changed your mind about in the last decade? It's a very interesting question, and I would like to throw that question back at you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've changed my mind about in the last decade is just the belief, and this is going off of what I just mentioned, that there is not one right way to manage your money. That if you take two people who are the same education, the same intelligence, they're just as informed as one another, those two people can come to vastly different conclusions over the best way to invest your money, to save your money, to spend your money. I know people who look at what I do with my own money personally, and they say that doesn't make any sense. And I think what they're really getting at is it doesn't make sense for them, but it makes sense for me. It makes sense for my personality. I have no desire to become the best investor in the world. I never will be. I really don't desire it. So when people look at how I invest my money in index funds, they say it doesn't make any sense, and they don't understand it. I am not against active management in the slightest. It's just that for my personality, this is what works best for me. And I think there's a lot of people who, when they come across somebody who manages their money differently than they do, they view it like it's a fight, like it's a debate, like we should settle the score and figure out who's right. And I just view it as like, that's not how it works. It's just everyone comes to the conclusion about what works for them. People like different kinds of foods, they like different kinds of music, but the idea that people can manage their money differently is somehow is offensive to a lot of people. So what I've changed my mind about is just, I don't judge other people manage their money. If people are spending much more than I do, investing differently than I do, I just tend to view it as, look, that can kind of work for them. I think that's the biggest thing I've changed my mind about.
Yeah, very well put. Some smart people say that you should actually every day kill at least one of your idea. That will put you in the right perspective. Second question, you said that one danger of long-term investing is that there is a lot of denial which masquerades as patience. How does one differentiate between what is denial and what is patience, and how does one overcome these biases?
I think it's extremely difficult, and it's usually only in hindsight that you figure out what was denial and what was patience. I do think there is a big point where a lot of people get into denial and they cling to an investing strategy or a belief that is no longer true, but they are doing it because they think they're being patient, but they're actually in denial. A lot of times what happens, it's when an investing strategy becomes an ingrained part of your personality. And it's almost impossible for you to let go of it because it's become so much of who you are. So the idea of strong beliefs weakly held, I think is really important. The idea that you have these like really strong beliefs about money and investing, but you're not so attached to them that you can't let go of them. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. Warren Buffett and Benjamin Graham, his longtime mentor, and Charlie Munger have massively changed how they invest all throughout their life. The Intelligent Investor, which is one of the best-selling investing books of all time, was written by Benjamin Graham. That book went through, I think, 6 different editions. And in every edition, a lot of the formulas that he put forth and said, this is how you should invest, he deleted them and updated them with new formulas because what worked in the past suddenly stopped working. So you come up with a new formula. Now, if you are the kind of person that is just so ingrained on, this is the formula that leads to investing success. Look, there are some things that are kind of timeless, like compounding and patience and whatnot. But the more specific you get with something, the more likely it is to need to be updated over time. So that's when I think you run the risk of just being stubborn rather than just being patient, is when your investing beliefs are an ingrained part of your personality.
Very well put. There are times when nothing happens for decades, and then decades happens in weeks. Past couple of weeks have been such. From SVB to Credit Suisse to First Republic Bank, the extent and pace of interest rate increase is surely going to take its toll. How does an investor manage to think long-term in these times?
Well, I think it's important to point out that nothing that's happened in the last couple of weeks is historically unprecedented. I mean, we had a giant banking crisis, 13 years ago, and before that, 20 years before that, and 10 years before that. So I think a lot of these things, look, the cast of characters is new every time, but it's the same story over and over again. People take too much risk. They were oblivious to their risk. It blows up. Some of them go bankrupt. There's a market correction. There's a recession. And then the cycle starts over again. That cycle has been with us forever, and it will always be with us. We will never get rid of that kind of greed and fear and oblivious of risk kind of cycle. So I think once you view these kind of episodes as not an out-of-the-blue black swan, but just as the normal and inevitable path of capitalism, then I think when they happen, you are less surprised about them. And you say, look, I didn't necessarily see it coming to this specific bank or at this specific time, but I expect there to be a banking crisis every 10 years for the rest of my life. Not exactly every 10 years, but on average, at least that for the rest of my life. We're never going to get rid of it. One way, I think, to deal with this that's really important is that if you are only saving and prepared for the risks that you can envision, by definition, you are always going to miss the surprise. And therefore, you only know that you are saving enough and you have enough cash and liquid securities. You only know when you're doing it right when it feels like it's a little bit too much. If the level of cash that you have feels like it's a little bit too much, then you know you have a fighting chance to deal with the risk, the bank imploding, Credit Suisse, doing what it's doing. You know you have the fighting chance of dealing with the surprise you didn't see coming when the cash you have feels like it's a little bit too much. And I feel like most people, when they get in over their heads, it's not that they didn't prepare for risks, it's that they only prepared for risks that were obvious to them. So you have to have like this abnormal feeling amount of savings and cushion to deal with the risks that you can't see coming.
Right. So life is complex. One of the recent blog that you wrote, life is complex, but complex things are always uncertain, and uncertainty feels dangerous, and having an answer makes danger feel reduced. It's an easy path of least resistance. The easiest way to explain a complex event is to assign a single cause. I'm sure every day we look for reasons why market was up today or why market was down today. We know deep down inside that there's no one single reason. Okay, Adani happened today or Credit Suisse happened yesterday and this is why it was up or down. There is no one reason that one can assign. But how does one overcome that urge? How does one actually think rational in these situations?
I think any giant news story in the global economy never has one cause. It's never like, oh, this bank went out of business because this person did something wrong or because the Fed raised interest rates. It's always like dozens of little things that compound at once. but that's too complicated for our brains to make sense of. We want to assign blame to one person or one company or one thing for every problem that happens. And I think the danger in that is that it leads you to the wrong lessons. If you are to take the belief that Silicon Valley Bank went out of business because the Federal Reserve recklessly raised interest rates, assigning one institution to blame for this, you're learning the wrong lesson. And therefore, your takeaway from it for dealing with future crises is going to be all screwed up, and you really haven't learned anything. Whether it's a pandemic or a global financial crisis or a war, there is never just one cause. It's always dozens of things happening at once. And I think once you appreciate the complexity of that global financial system, I think what it really does is it humbles your ability to try to predict what's going to happen next. Because if you could say, oh, when the Federal Reserve does X, Y is going to happen next. When a bank manager does A, B is going to happen next. That is very appealing in your ability to predict what's going to happen next. But that's never what actually happens. It's always these like dozens or hundreds of little innocuous events that don't seem like they are that big on their own. But when they combine with other little events, you get these huge outcomes, like a financial crisis or a pandemic or a war or whatnot. And I think it just leaves us fundamentally overconfident in our ability to predict the future. So once you gain a healthy respect for the complexity of these events, you stop trying to predict them. That's the biggest takeaway. And that doesn't mean that you are just like oblivious to what's going to happen next. I think it makes a lot of sense to invest in preparedness, but not in prediction. So I have no clue what the biggest economic story is going to be over the next year, over the next 5 years. I have no clue whatsoever. But I'm prepared for a wide range of outcomes. I'm prepared for a market collapse. I'm prepared for a banking collapse. I'm prepared for myself, for my own income to fall substantially. I have no idea what the cause might be, but I'm prepared for a wide range of outcomes. I think that's the only way to really deal with it in real time.
There's a nice quote by Voltaire. It says, "Uncertainty is not pleasant, but certainty is absolutely absurd."
Absolutely. That's great. Yes.
Okay, this is more from the point of view of your writing. How do you come up with these anecdotes and examples and excerpts of books? Do you read them and do you mark them for future use, or you say you're writing about something and then you start looking for an example that best explains it?
It's definitely the former. It's definitely just, I just read a lot of various things. I almost never read investing books or finance books, but I like to read history and science and biographies. And if you always have it in your head, this idea of how does this topic that has nothing to do with finance, what does that teach me about finance? Like, what does that teach me about behavior? And therefore, what can it teach me about finance? You see them everywhere. These little stories and ideas and anecdotes, they are all over the place. And so that's what I go. I just do a lot of casual reading. There's never a purpose or a goal to what's reading. It's just reading for the fun of it. And then, yeah, whenever I come across a story or an idea or an example, I just kind of mark it down. I have a Google Doc on my desktop that just has like thousands of these little snippets and stories. And then as I come up with an idea for an investing article, it's like, oh, that reminds me of this story that I found years ago that can actually apply really well to this topic that I'm thinking about right now.
Right. In 2015, you wrote a blog, Financial Advice for My Son. That's just when he was born. But my son is 15 years old today. Would you change any of that advice now? And would you add a couple of more to that?
I don't think I would change anything. And by the way, that son is 7 years old, and you might be able to hear him in the background. He just woke up here. I don't think I would change anything. One thing that has become readily apparent, and everyone who is a parent, I think, can agree with this. We now have a daughter as well. She's 3 years old. And the difference between my son and my daughter in their personalities is night and day. Every parent who has multiple kids can relate to that, that the same kids who have the same parents in the same household, the parents who are trying to instill the same values, are completely different. Totally different personalities and whatnot. And I think that there actually is a financial takeaway in that how do I as a parent teach my kids about money when the kids are so different themselves and they have totally different personalities? If you take the belief that what matters in money is behavior It's not the numbers, it's the behavior. And then if you recognize that your kids have completely different personalities and behaviors themselves, then these universal financial advice topics become much harder to come by. So what I wrote in that letter, it's not specific. It's all very broad, and I still agree with all of it, I'm pretty sure. So I don't know if I would change anything, but that's been another realization as a parent, is just how different kids can be. And when you see it in your own kids, then you realize like it makes sense that adults have so many different beliefs about the world. If a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old can be so different with the same parents, then of course 2 adults from different countries and different generations have vastly different views on how the world works as well.
Morgan, first of all, congratulations on crossing 3 million copies of Psychology of Money. But
Thank
my,
you. Thank you.
what I want to ask you is, on the spectrum of reading, if we go from ephemeral reading to the long-term reading, how do you choose? A lot of people say it's not about reading a lot many things, but it is about rereading some of the old things. How do you distribute your times between what to read, what not to read? What does the author of a book who has sold 3 million copies recommend in terms of reading?
See, this is another thing that I've probably changed my mind about in the last couple of years. I used to believe that the person who read the most number of books won, and that if you wanted to get smarter, you need to read as many books as you possibly can. I still kind of believe that, but I've moved much more into rereading what I think were the best books. And so rather than reading, 50 different books per year, maybe now I'm reading 10 new books per year, and I'm rereading another 10 books that I've read in the past, and I'm reading it again. Some books I've read 3 times. And it is so true that when you reread a book, you learn something new every single time. So that's what I think that's what I've shifted towards, is like the books that had a profound impact on me, I'm going to read them again rather than just trying to cast the widest net that I can. One other thing that I do with reading that I would recommend for everybody is a lot of people who think they don't like reading, actually what's happened is that they burden themselves with bad books or books that are just not right for them. And so I think it's really important when you're reading a book or an article or a blog post, if you don't like it, quit. Stop reading it. Go find something else that you do like. Don't feel an obligation to finish it. True for my book as well. If you don't like it, close it and find something else. That's completely fine. Everybody has a different kind of personality in terms of what writing and what books work for them. And you just have to find the ones that work for you. So I do that a lot with my reading. It's no offense to the authors, but if I'm reading a book, I think I can tell very quickly, oh, this isn't going to work for me. This writing style is, I'm going to struggle my way through this kind of writing. So let's close it and find something else. I feel no guilt, no shame to just move on and trying to find something that's going to work for me.
If you can just add a few names to which are your all-time favorite classics that you want to read and reread.
I think the Nassim Taleb books, it's funny, I actually have one right here. This was not planned, but Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb and The Black Swan and whatnot. I think those are on my my rereading list. That's probably why it's literally sitting on my desk right next to me. I think those are, some people don't like his writing. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's really well written stuff. And I also think that the points that are taken away from it on how to think about risk and uncertainty are very, very good. I also love reading World War II books because World War II it was the biggest spectacle of human behavior that's ever existed and ever been documented, and how people dealt with the fear, the trauma, the greed, the success, the triumph. Like there are so many behavioral lessons to take away from that. So Stephen Ambrose is, I think, the best World War II writer. And I read a lot of his books. And that's another thing. Like, no matter how many times you read about World War II, of course, you know the ending. This is not like, you know what happens. But there's so many of just these like little anecdotes and stories about how people dealt with the uncertainty and dealt with the risk that I just find endlessly fascinating.
Thank you so much. I would like to recommend you a book that you will learn a lot from. I don't know if you have read, but Mahabharata is one book that you should read, and there are lots of good plots and subplots and twists and turns in that. With that,
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Morgan for joining us today, and thank you all so much. Thank you so much,
Thank
Morgan.
you so much, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you.